The stones of the ancient world still speak, revealing the people, places, and events that illuminate the world of the Bible. Join archaeologist Dr. George Sparks and Dr. David E. Graves as they explore biblical discoveries that bring Scripture's historical setting to life. Sponsored by Electronic Christian Media. Now let's dig into today's podcast and discover the past.
Good day, everybody. This is a new archaeological podcast, Stones That Speak, with Dr. David Graves, and I am Dr. George Sparks. We have a very special guest, Frankie Snyder. And it's so exciting to have her here because she has been such an influence in the Holy Land. Frankie Snyder serves on the ABR DIG as a wet sifting supervisor. She has volunteered with ABR at the Kerbet L. McCarter, which is a candidate for Biblical Eye, and Shiloh since meeting the group at the Temple Mount Sifting Project in 2008. For 17 years, probably more than that now, for 17 years of archaeological wet sifting experience has given her a wide-ranging experience in the identification of small finds. Frankie moved to Israel in 2007 with plans to retire. However, retirement did not happen. Her volunteering at the Wet Sifting Project turned into a paying job, then a full-time career. With a BS in mathematics from Virginia Tech and also a MA in Jewish Studies from Hebrew College in Boston, and a lifelong love for rocks, she has launched a niche career in analyzing King Herod's ornate opus sectile floors created from polished multicolored stone tiles cut in a variety of geometric shapes and patterns. She assisted in reconstructing an opus sectile floor for the 2013 and 2014 exhibit at the Israel Museum of Herod the Great. Now, this is really fantastic because behind me, you can see what I have of that floor tile. And Frankie, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today.
Yeah, great to have you there, Frankie, and good to see you again. We worked together in a couple of places over the years, and always fun. I guess we'll just kick off the podcast with a question regarding how did you pivot from going from mathematics into archaeology and a kind of a specialized kind of archaeology?
When I first arrived in Israel, the first couple of weeks, I was doing all my paperwork as a new immigrant. And then I had about 2 months' time where I could do some volunteer work before I started my Ulpan class. So I heard about the Temple Mount Sifting Project, paid a visit out there. It was right there in town. I could get there by bus. And I started working there as a volunteer. And after about 2 weeks as a volunteer, I was actually hired. One of the things that intrigued me most that they were finding were these geometric shaped tiles. They're the ones right behind that George has right behind him. We were finding these geometric shaped tiles. And one day I asked one of the archaeologists, at the time it was Tally Cohen, who was the archaeologist sitting at the table that day. And I said, is anybody working with these tiles, trying to figure out what the original patterns were or the time period that they came from, anything like that? And she said, no, right now we're collecting them. We're keeping them all together, but we're just cataloging them, just doing, mono-cataloging, and we're packing them away, but nobody's really researching it. So would you be interested in doing that? And I said, well, yeah, I've got a degree in math and I really like geometry. So yeah, I'd love to do that. And she said, well, have at it. So the next day I showed up at the site with the old trusty compass and protractor, the things that you learned how to use in high school geometry that you thought, I'll never touch these again. This is when you bring them out. And showed up with my ruler and everything. And I began measuring the tiles and cataloging them more properly with the dimensions. One of the main things we had to figure out was what kind of ruler was being used. Now, this sounds kind of funny, but we had tiles from all these different time periods. And we finally figured out we had them from the Herodian period when Herod first introduced them, all the way up to modern geometric tiles. So how do you figure out what time period they're from? Well, one of the main things to do is to figure out what kind of a ruler are they using. Are they using inches to measure? Are they using centimeters to measure? Are they using a Roman ruler to measure? Now, a Roman ruler is just slightly shorter than a imperial ruler. Are they using that and separating the ruler into halves and quarters and eighths? And so this is one of the first things I did, was try to figure out what time period these tiles came from. After a while, I finally figured out there were sort of four groups. There were ones from the Herodian period, we had ones from the Byzantine period, we had Crusader tiles, and then we had more modern ones. And each used a different ruler. So that was one of the first things I did. And by doing that, I could actually say, okay, I have 4 tiles now, or 4 boxes. And the ones I was really interested in working with were the ones from King Herod's time period, because those are the ones that were used on the Temple Mount in the late Second Temple period. So those were the oldest of them, but probably the most fascinating.
Oh, really neat. Yeah, we were excavating our bath complex at Tel El Hammam. We discovered that it was a Roman arpent, which was 34.5 or something like that. So it was a Roman standard measurement
Yes.
for one of the lengths of the building, but people I don't think that they used a different form of measurement. So that's really interesting, and would help you identify which period by the different types of ruler, I guess, or measurements.
Yes, it does. And what you have to do is measure with several different kinds of ruler and see where you're getting very specific whole measurements. Like, is it an inch and 2 inches and 3 inches, or is it a centimeter and 2 inches and 3 centimeters? Or is it with a Roman foot? Is it one full Roman foot? Is it a half? Is it a quarter? Is it an eighth? The Crusader one, I actually figured out rather accidentally. I had been measuring them all dutifully with my centimeters, because that's what you have to do in archaeology. Everybody's using centimeters.
Right.
And I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to a floor that I knew was a Crusader floor. And I laid my ruler down to take my picture, and I laid it, starting at the edge and looking at where all the increments were. And I took the picture. And then all of a sudden I looked at it and I realized I was looking at the wrong side of the ruler. I was looking at the centimeter side, and what I should have been looking at was the inches side, because the tiles were lined up with the splits between the tiles being exactly at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches, not centimeters. And I realized at that point that when the Crusaders came into Israel, they brought something from Europe, and it was called the inch. And it turns out that their tiles were measured by the inch. In fact, someone else gave me some tiles from a church, and I had a choice between Crusader and Byzantine, and I'm measuring them, and I said, this is a Crusader floor, right? And the archaeologist goes, yeah, how did you know? I said, because they all measure to the inch. I was like, that's from a Crusader floor. And he goes, oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So just measuring them and figuring out what kind of a ruler somebody was using was very important in this study.
Oh, wow. Amazing how mathematics can help us with our archaeology, and all those courses we used to take and are really important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, George, did you have a question?
Well, you know what? You hold a bachelor's of science in mathematics from Virginia Tech. How exactly, and that you don't have to be exactly, how exactly does your math and geometry background give you an advantage over traditionally trained archaeologists like Dr. Graves there when constructing ancient floors? Now, you just gave a good example of noticing the difference between a Roman period and a Byzantine period construction of a floor using the centimeters to inches. That was, I would not even thought of that. Do you have anything else you could give us a little tidbit more about what would be unique?
Yeah, some of it has to do with your mental process as you're doing this. Are you thinking in a forward moving direction, or are you processing backwards? Are you doing reverse engineering? And mathematicians find it much easier than some other people to do reverse engineering. I want to read to you a quote from a Sherlock Holmes short story. I found this a while back, and it's really a good explanation of this. It's a short story called A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And it reads, in solving a problem of this sort, the grand thing is to be able to reason backwards. That is a very useful accomplishment and a very easy one, but people do not practice it much. There are 50 who can reason synthetically, meaning going forward, for one who can reason analytically. Most people, if you describe a train of events to them, they will tell you what the result will be. They could not put those events together in their mind and argue from them something that will come to pass. There are a few people, however, who, when told a result, are able to resolve from their own inner consciousness what the steps were that led up to that result. This power is what I mean when I talk of reasoning backwards or analytically. And this is what I had to do with these tiles. You have these tiles and you have to go backwards and say, so how did they put them together? What was the reasoning process that was used in order to get this pattern? Can you go backwards in your mind? Can you go backwards in history and look at what the archaeologists were doing, or what the masons were doing in order to give you this archaeology now?
We sometimes say we have to do the same, like it's just like Hebrew, we have to read it backwards.
Well, it's not just reading that way, but you have to think back in time and figure out what steps did this person go through to get this design, and then you can go back and reconstruct how he started and how he proceeded through it.
We're saying is you go from the known to the unknown.
Right.
Yeah, great. When you're looking at a pile of broken geometry, triangles and squares, and perhaps you can expand a little bit about how the process was with you coming to the conclusion that this is a Byzantine or Roman pattern. How did you kind of work out the patterns?
The first thing, like I said, was figuring out what kind of ruler they were using. Then you could say, oh, okay, these are my Herodian tiles because they are all based on the Roman foot. And that's simply by taking the measurements and trying to find out what whole units are they using, or what fractions of whole units. You're not going to be measuring in 23.967 inches. You know, you're not going to be doing that kind of measurement. You're looking for holes and halves and quarters like that. And that's how I really got started with it. Then after figuring out what ruler they were using, it was a matter of measuring like the angles of the different stones. Are they common angles like 90 degrees and 45 degrees, or are they something else? And I realized that Herod was using something else. He was using what I call Herod's triangle, which is a triangle that is built inside of a square. So it has rather odd measurements of 52 degrees at the top, 64 and 64 at the bottom. And sometimes you would find a tile that had this really weird measurement. Like I had one tile that had a 38-degree angle on it. I looked at that thing for a couple of years going, what do you do with this? I don't get how it fits into a pattern because I'm used to 45s and 90s and things like this, not a 38. And then all of a sudden I realized 38 plus 52 equals 90. Okay, 52 was the Herod's triangle. And if you took the 38-degree angle and put it next to a 52, then you got a very nice 90. So I started looking for patterns that had a 90-degree angle that was split, but was it split exactly in half? Was it split the other way? And trying to figure out what kind of patterns actually use that. And what I came up with was a pinwheel pattern. And so when I drew the pinwheel pattern, but instead of putting 8 triangles that come together, each with 45 degrees on them, it was like, take 4 of them and make them Herod's 52-degree Herod's triangle, and that leaves you the 38. And so when I drew it out, 38 fit in perfectly because I knew that the pattern had to be like a Roman foot or the 3/4 of a Roman foot. It had to be one of those. And as soon as I drew it out, I took my tile, plopped it in there, and goes, it fits perfectly. And so that told me which pattern they were using because the tile itself was so quirky. in the measurements. It's not one that you would be looking for. And it took me a while to find it, to figure it out. But it was only after I was working with the Herod's Triangle for a while, realizing, is it something odd that matches up with the 64 or with the 52 that then gives you the common 90? And when it does, or the common 180, if it does, then that helps you choose a Roman pattern, and figuring out then how Herod tweaked it a little bit by taking out a standard triangle and putting in his Herod's triangle into the pattern. And that would help you develop what patterns were being used.
Now, did you have some existing tiles that you could sort of look at and compare? And did that help with your research too, or?
What I did was I went and I visited as many Herodian palaces as I could to see the patterns on the floor, also look to see what had been published on them. The first place I started was Masada. I went up there with Asaf Abraham from the Sifting Project. We went up there in November of 2008, and they actually let us go down on the floors. You know, usually you're walking on that catwalk above the floors. They said we could go down on the floors. And so we measured exactly what was happening. And this is where I discovered Herod's Triangle that's on the floor at Masada. Then when I started working with the tiles from Herodian, lo and behold, there's the same triangle, except it was larger. And then some of the other ones were the same at Herodian and Masada. So I had some of the actual Herodian tiles to work with, and then visiting the sites at Jericho. At the time, you could see all the impressions in the floor, you know, so you could see what they were using there. So it helped to be able to see the actual stones, see the actual sites, see the actual impressions in the floor in order to figure out what Herod's mason was doing, what his plans were. One of the things was that Herod wanted unique. He was importing a Roman craft, but he wanted the work that was in his buildings to be unique. And by using this Herod's Triangle, he created unique floors.
Right. Well, as we transition maybe now to the sifting process,
Yes.
George, do you have a question or?
Yeah, I do have a question. You know, when you're going into this very unique construction of tile that Herod has that is a variant from the Roman. So I'm just wondering, when you're doing this, it's like going back in time and getting in the mind of Herod the Great.
Yes,
I think
that's what you have to do.
That's just dangerous.
Yeah. You know, is it Herod the Great or is it his mason? Whatever it was, Herod was very, very involved in all of his projects. And when you look at his various palaces, especially like Jericho or primarily Herodian, when you look at the construction of that building, circular building, and then all these other buildings that are going over them and everything, you realize that he was very much invested in what was going on. And so he was telling his masons, I want this, and I want something unique. I want something that nobody else has. So you're getting that into not only into his mind, but into the mind of his masons who were designing the floors that went into these buildings.
Not to get political, but it sounds a little Trumpish.
Trumpish all. Hey, be careful there, David. We can't do no political stuff.
We don't do the politics, but I just thought, well, that sounds a little bit like want to control the construction. Interesting. Well, George, did you want to pick up on the thing?
Yes, wet sifting. David was, for an audience unfamiliar with the technique, can you explain the practical differences between dry sifting and wet sifting, and why is water so vital for finding these small artifacts?
When you're digging at a site, you're using a shovel and you're coming up with all kinds of dirt, but there's material buried within the dirt. And so what archaeologists do is they take the bucket of dirt and they put it onto a sifting tray, which is a rectangular wooden box with a metal mesh screen on it. Dump the dirt on, shake it really hard, all the powdery dirt falls through. And what sits on top of the tray are larger stones and rocks and lots of little tiny items. We're looking for anything that is made by man, fashioned by man. This could be pottery, it could be coins, nails, glass, just about anything. So by shaking out the powdery dirt, you see all these items on there, but they're still covered with powdery dirt on the top of them. So then some sites will use wet sifting. Now, in order to do wet sifting, you have to have access to water. So many archaeological sites do not have this option to do it right on site. Some of them will actually send it off site now for wet sifting. With wet sifting, you then take this material, put it on a tray that has a little bit smaller holes in it. Usually we use a nylon mesh on there, plastic mesh. And then you use very low tech, a garden hose with a spray. You just take the garden hose, spray over the whole thing, and now the dirt has been removed. And now you can see the difference between a piece of pottery and a coin. You're looking for different colors, you're looking for different textures, you're looking for different weights as you lift them up. So when you wash off the material, then you can see what's buried in there. One of the things that this has really helped with are things like bullae. A bulla is a document seal. That's a wad of clay. Okay, if you have a wad of clay sitting there on your dry sifting tray, it's going to look like every other wad of clay that's there. It's dirty, it's dusty, it's another chunk of clay. It's another chunk of dirt on there. When you take the hose and you spray it off, all of a sudden you see that on that wad of clay, there's something stamped on it. There's a picture, there's a design, there are words, there's something that's on there that you could never see when it was dry, but as soon as it's wet and you've washed off all the powdery dirt, suddenly there it is. Also, it helps you identify different kind of materials. I can teach somebody how to wet sift in 5 minutes. Take your bucket, add water to it, swish it around, dump it on the tray, take your garden hose, wipe it off, and now look for stuff. Okay, but what are you looking for? Can you recognize what you're seeing? Oh, this is pottery. Yes, but at the end of the day, I don't need 5,000 pieces of pottery to go through. I need to know that you can tell me, or that you can recognize, does it have an edge to it? Is there a rim to it? Is it a handle? Is it the base? Does it have a design on the outside? Those are the potteries I need you to save. And the other potteries that are just broken pieces with all broken edges, they can go out with the trash. If I'm looking for metal, I'm looking for a coin that's made out of bronze. Bronze is kind of gold or brownish looking. No, a bronze coin there is going to be green because it's tarnished. You're looking for iron. Iron is not going to be silver. It's going to be rust. It's going to be rusty color. If you see something that's gray, you have 1 or 2 choices. If it's gray and it's metal and it's very lightweight, it might be silver. If it's very heavyweight, it's lead. Gold is the only metal that is gold. Even with the dirt on it, you can see that it's gold and sparkling. All the rest of them, you have to look for a different color. So it takes time to learn the materials. At Shiloh, we get all these seashells and fossils of seashells. Okay, I don't need the fossils, I just need the seashells. Tel Shiloh is not near the ocean. It's 30 miles away from the ocean. Therefore, how did the shell get here? Somebody had to bring it. Somebody had to decide to use it for something. Very often they'll have a hole in it to be used like on a necklace or something like this. So you have to learning the materials is what takes time.
The Murex shell used for purple cloth. So
that's right. And we have found them at Tel Shiloh. We found them at the Temple Mount. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, part of the priest colors that they would use. So everything's quite important. One of the items that kind of surprised me was bitumen that we had at the Temple Mount Sifting Project when we were working there. And maybe you can explain a little bit about that. That can be black. So you would have
but when you first see it, it's not black. It has a patina that has built up on the outside of it, and it's anything from light gray to dark gray. And it is not black. It's only when you spray the water on that kind of washes away the patina, then you see that you have black. This is a stone that comes from down by the Dead Sea at Nebi Musa. It is bituminous chalk, and we call it bitumen for short. And it was used for tiles, for tabletops, things like that during the Herodian period. And then during the Byzantine period, we find church altar tables and the columns that go underneath the altars. We find those made out of bitumen. So it was used locally. It was not used internationally. It was not something that was exported. It was just used regionally there.
Interesting. Now with the wet sifting, we first met at the Temple Mount Sifting Project.
Yes.
Then I went on. I only dug briefly at McCotter, but and then at Till Shiloh. Where are some of the other sites that you've worked and helped with this, and maybe how the development of the transmission of the wet sifting has moved around to some of the sites? I think that Tel Shiloh might have been one of the first sites we used wet sifting outside of Jerusalem, I believe, but I could be wrong.
The wet sifting has been used at other sites. It was used at Tel Lachish by Starkey back in the whenever. He used it some, but then it didn't really catch on. One of the problems is you need to have access to water. So the majority of archaeological sites are in the middle of nowhere. They don't have a water pipeline nearby that they can hook into in order to wet sift the material on site. So what sites have started doing now is bringing the material into Jerusalem. And at Emek Zerim National Park, where the Temple Mount Sifting Project was, the first few years when they started in 2004, I started there in 2007, up until 2008, we only did the Temple Mount material and a few test sites. But starting about 2008, 2009, we began to have other sites bring the material to us there. One of the first one was Eilat Mazar's material from the Ophel. It was only a mile and a half away. She didn't have quick access to water, so you put the bags in the truck and you bring them over to us just a mile and away, and we would sift the material there. Then we began sifting all these other different sites within the city of David and within Jerusalem. So the tunnel that goes underneath the step street from the Temple Mount all the way down to the Siloam Pool was one of the first projects that we did. I think that still may be ongoing. That's so much material from there. That was with Eli Shukran and Ronnie Reich. Also, Beit Mayan, the spring house at the Gihon Pool, the Gihon Spring in the city of David. Again, Ronnie Reich and Eli Shukran. Then we started with the Step Street, and we sifted the Step Street material for about, I don't know how many years we were at, probably 8-10 years we were doing that material. That was under Joe Uziel, and then later Shon Zanton, Moran Hajbi, Ari Levy, I think all the people who were there. They would bring the material to us and we would sift it and then send back all the goodies to them. So all the different projects that are around in the Western Wall area. There was a huge Byzantine street that went through there, and Shlomi Wexler was one who was doing that. She brought us her material from there. All different areas that were down underneath the Kotel area. So there's a building under there called the Strauss House. We had that material. I don't remember who was in charge of that one. Probably Avi Solomon probably was with that one. We sifted material from the small Roman theater that is underneath Wilson's Arch. That was Avi Solomon, Joe Uziel, and Tehillah Lieberman. I'm trying to remember, who had what. So we did materials from all over the city there. We also had some other material brought to us by the City of David projects that were up by Has Promenade, where they found another palace up there with the Proto-Ionic capitals. They brought that material to us. So this is the way most of the places we're doing it. We're bringing the material to us. Now, what happened at Tel Shiloh when we first went there, the very first year, they had already had a small sifting site with just like four tables down by the visitor center. But we had to put all of our material in trucks and drive it all the way down to the visitor center or to the material.
That season, I remember that clearly.
Yes. So then the next year, they got smart and then built their own new wet sifting facility right up at the site where we were working. So put it in a wheelbarrow and bring it down, or send people down with bags in their hands. It made it much easier by doing it that way. But our advantage to being able to do it was the agricultural fields for the town of Shiloh were right down the hill from us. So you put on a 50-meter hose down to their water source, and we had water. And this is what is missing from so many sites, like here at Makatir. There's no water any place around there, to be able to wet sift anything. And most sites are like that. So it's the advantage of being in a place where you have access to water, hook up a hose and bring it up to where you're working and do your material right there.
At Tel El Hammam in Jordan, we didn't have it on site either. And we did have a little bit of water at the mosque at the base, but we had to take a lot of our pottery back to the hotel. And for a number of years, they allowed us to do the cleaning of our pottery, the washing of our pottery on top of the patio overlooking the Dead Sea, which is quite pleasant, but we had to do a lot of carting of pottery every day back on the bus.
Well, even at Kirbet Makatir, they had to do that. They either took it back to the hotel, or after a while, they got permission from the sifting project to bring it to us in Emexarine. They would sift it themselves. At the end of the day, a van load would come in with half a dozen people and say, okay, take those trays over there. You guys wash your pottery. And then they take it back with them. But they had to have a place that had water. And so this is where Scott really experimented with all this wet sifting and loved it, because all of a sudden, wow, pottery's clean. We could be cleaning everything if when we get to Shiloh, we get a water system going there.
I remember the conversation I had with Scotty when after we had a couple of weeks, I think we had at the Temple Mount Sifting Project, and when Scotty, because we dug a Tel El Hammam together, he said, well, I'm going to be going over as the new director at Shiloh. And I said, well, you know what we should do? We should set that up at Shiloh, because we've got some water there. And he thought it was a great idea. And so we kind of innovated. And
that's where I first met you, was when you came over there for the 2 weeks to learn. You brought a crew over to learn about wet sifting, or Scott really wanted to learn about wet sifting so that he knew what he would be getting himself into, or what the advantages of the system were, and being able to set it up at Shiloh once we started there.
I remember sitting at the table. I've got a photo of you showing all little pieces. So things you've discovered, little triangular pieces and all that. You were trying to puzzle at that time, put all those together. So in those early stages, so it's been an evolution for us both, I guess, in our and how we adapt and take our field and our background and how we apply it. I remember at Shiloh, I was at a hardware store and I found this caulking gun, and Lane Rittmeyer said, that'd be great. We put our concrete in that. We could squirt it inside of the, I said, that's exactly from my construction background and years. And that's how we adapted that to the restoration of the walls at Shiloh. So innovation.
You take what you know in the different crafts, and then you adapt it to the archaeological scene, which is what I did with the geometry. I adapted it to the archaeological floors by doing it that way. But when we sifted the material from Mount Ebal, that material we created. What's his name? Steve Rudd created just a small sifting unit that was on top of this great big plastic drum. The water was in there. We had 2 hoses, one on either side, for people to start sifting the material from Mount Ebal. And that was, make a small one there at the place where we were staying. We had access to their water, so we could sift that material. And that again was a matter of just going through it, dry sifting it first to remove all the powdery dirt, then bringing it over to wet sifting. And when I talk about learning the materials, what does it look like? You're going through all this stuff. You're going through this pottery. There's something on my tray that looked like a piece of pottery. It was, it was the thickness. It looked, size, shape, color, got all the dust on it. I sprayed it off, and it was kind of like a little bit different color. And I picked it up and I go, whoa, this is too heavy. This is too heavy for pottery. Washed it off some more, and lo and behold, that was the Mount Ebal curse tablet. Wow. But it was a matter of being able to distinguish the materials by the color, by the size, by the weight, by the texture. And that one, it was by the weight. I picked it up and it was 5 times too heavy for a piece of pottery of that size and shape. But it's learning the materials. What do you expect to see? What is something going to look like here? A bronze coin is not going to be bronze. A bronze coin is going to be green. A piece of iron is not going to be silver. It's going to be rust colored. Iron is going to be heavy. Silver is going to be lightweight. They're both gray. They're both metals. One is lightweight, one is heavy. So you used all different kind of senses there in order to figure out what these things are on the tray. And the use of water for the wet sifting helps tremendously, because all of a sudden you can see the colors, you can see the shapes. We have found little tiny glass game pieces. They're the size and shape of a contact lens. Little tiny thing shaped like this. And it looks like mud on the tray. You spray it off, and it still doesn't look like glass because it's got patina on it. You can't see through it. So you pick it up to the light, scratch off a little tiny bit of the patina, and go, yes, glass. But to be able to see something the size of a contact lens on the tray, or the Byzantine minim coins, which are smaller than your baby fingernail. They are the size of the eraser on a pencil. It's only that big around. That's the size of them.
Yeah.
You can't see them at all when they're mixed in with the dirt.
Wow.
But as soon as you spray it off with water, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what is that tiny little thing in there? And you go, Byzantine minim, tiny little coin.
And the other thing is the square rocks. There's not usually a lot of square rocks. We know it's tessera lately, and you see them in various colors. So,
however, square rocks are also gaming dice.
That's right.
When we sifted the theater, that small room in the theater underneath Wilson's Arch, we found about 40 dice in there, and they're all only the size, these tiny little things like this. But it starts off looking like a mosaic tessera. It looks like this is the size of a glass mosaic tessera, just like this. And then you wash it a little better and you go, whoa, it's got dots. You go, yeah, you have dice.
Yeah, really interesting. George, do you have another question there? And
Oh, it's a little bit fine tuning what we're already talking about in this regarding the small finds and wet sifting, because wet sifting is kind of famous for rescuing these small finds like bolide.
Yes.
But when we talk about bolide, they're actually clay seals. They're made out of clay.
It's a wad of clay.
Huh?
It's a wad of clay. Yeah.
It's a wad of clay. Okay, but then you're adding water to clay. How come it doesn't just disappear?
Because most of these have been baked. What happens was very often these seals on the documents were caught in a fire. This is what happened in the city of David, where they found a whole library. Or the library wasn't there anymore. They found 49 seals in one area, and it's because this was a library area where documents were stored. And when the city was burnt during destruction of the first temple, when the city was burnt, everything in there got burned. However, those seals got burned and they got baked, so now they're hard. We occasionally find seals that have not been baked. You have to be careful with those because you can ruin them. But the other ones that have been baked, it's hard as a ceramic cup, by then, if they've been caught in a fire.
Apart from the lead E-mount E-ball piece you found, is there another artifact that sort of stands out in your memory from all the years you've been working? Something that was really special?
I always tell people, the Herodian tiles were a great thrill, and this is a whole group of items. But if I have to pick a single item, it's always the Valley Ball curse tablet. So that's the one I remember the most. But when you're learning to identify materials, you have to kind of think outside the box at times. Last year at Tel Shiloh, on a tray, I saw a stone, and it was sort of pyramid shaped. And it's like, pyramid shape is not natural. What is this? It's got a smooth bottom. It's got several sides on it. And I'm going, it's probably a game piece, because I've seen those before in literature. I'd seen them. And I go, it's probably a game piece. And then the next tray I did, whoa, there's another one. And then when I went back and looked through the records of Tel Shiloh and was looking at the pictures, I found out a couple of years before that, somebody had found one prior to that, and they found it and they saved it because it didn't look regular. It looks like something different. And we go back in the record and put another game piece. Go see these two over here that we just found this year.
Yeah.
And so over time, and because I've been doing this for now 20 years, I've seen lots of material from lots of different timepieces, and you learn that different levels have different materials. So what we find at the very top at Tel Shiloh, we'll start at the very, very top, you've got a thin layer of modern material and maybe some Islamic. Then you hit Byzantine and you find certain things in there. Then you go to Roman, you'll find certain things in there. Like our glass, we only find Roman and up, Roman and going up to the surface. Below the Roman level, we don't find glass. We might find faience from farther back, but not regular glass. When people are sifting and they're going, I got to watch out that I don't miss a coin. I said, you're in the Bronze Age, no coins. Don't worry about coins down there. So you realize what kinds of materials are found in which layers. So even at Tel Shiloh, or especially at Shiloh, I'll go up to one of the archaeologists who's in charge of a square and say, okay, what level are you in this material that you're sending us right now? Because I want to tell my workers what kind of stuff to watch out for.
My square was actually Roman that year, and they've gone down a lot deeper, of course, into the Middle Bronze. I think they were working this year.
Yeah, going down to MB, you get down into the Middle Bronze.
Yeah.
But one funny thing that I saw there one time, I was sifting a tray, or the person next to me was sifting a tray, and we saw little tiny seashells. They're about 1 inch long, 3/4 inch wide, shaped sort of like an angel's wing. And if you put two of them together, it looked like a little set of angel's wings. And what I remember from the sifting project was whenever we found that kind of shell, it was from the Byzantine period, you were guaranteed 100% you were going to find Byzantine minims in that material, which are very hard to see. And so I took the shell and I went up to the square and I said, guys, you're in the Byzantine layer. I can tell because of this kind of shell. And I'm telling you, guaranteed 100%, you're going to be able to find Byzantine minims in this level. You go, really? 100%? Yeah. Next morning, the person next to me was doing, was sifting again. And I was helping them with the tray. And I said, oh, look, there are the shells. Look for the coins. Sure enough, there it was. Yeah. They were in there. And these are the coins that are the size of the back end of your pencil. But we knew to watch for it because there's certain things that always went together. Now, why they go together, I have no idea. First off, Jews didn't eat shellfish. So you're not going to find it in the Jewish layers. You're not going to find it in the Second Temple period. It was only when you got in the Byzantine period that we start finding the shells like this, because the Christians were doing something with it. I don't know if they were using them in the stew, put a bunch of them in the stew and making something with it. Whatever it was, we would find them, but you would always find those coins with it. So you need to know what levels people are in. So I very often visit the squares and ask them, okay, where are you now? Where are you now? Where are you now? I need to tell my workers what they need to watch for and what they're not going to find. Don't worry about finding coins. You're not going to find coins down in there. You're much too deep.
That's right. Yeah, it's experience. Yeah. I remember we were working at Tel El Hammam and Lane Ridmire. We had uncovered what looked like a gate post, and he said, you go over there so many meters and you dig over there. He says, you're going to find the other gate post. And they kind of looked at him strange, but they said, okay. They went over there and dug. Gary tells us,
there's your gate post.
There it is. Here's the other side of it. Just experience from Lane's architectural background that he learned, and it helped. So yeah, we just have a lot of experience that we can bring to the different sites. And
yeah, like I said, I can teach somebody how to wet sift in 5 minutes, but for them to learn the materials and to know what to watch for, what to look for, because something's not going to look like what you think it's going to look like. It's not going to be the color you're expecting. It may not be the texture you're expecting, but after a while, you'll start figuring it out and you'll start recognizing the material. Along about the 3rd or 4th day, the people are sifting with is like, oh, well, what that is. Oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. I know how to tell the difference between this and this now. It just takes time to learn the materials.
Yeah. George, do you have any other questions?
Yes, maybe this might be a little bit repetitive, but however, in looking behind me over here, you see some of the tile that I believe this is reconstruction from the Temple Mount. Is that
Yes, this
correct?
is
That
Temple
they're
Mount
building?
tiles here. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So when I look at that, what comes to my mind is that this is the floor that Jesus and Herod and the disciples and Mary and Joseph, according to the biblical
Exactly.
narrative, I'm not going to say they walked on these particular pieces. They might have,
They might have.
but with an imagination, it takes something that was just, there's blank there. I read the text and I said, okay. And maybe because of Hollywood, I can see some characters in fine dressing, like how they dress.
Right.
But for the temple itself, even in the models, we see the models of the temple. There's a nice one over in Jerusalem. Of course, everybody sees the city of Jerusalem. But what does the tile look like? And now we get to see it. Like that is the tile that not only they walked on, but they could have been gambling on it. Who knows? The money exchangers were on that when Jesus took the whip and
Right.
he's telling them, "My house is not going to be, a house of den of thieves." Just so much goes through my mind, and uh, where his disciples were walking, but they're why they're walking, they're looking, and they're saying the same thing. They're looking and seeing the same thing we are now. And what's cool, Frankie, is that you have a degree in mathematics and I believe it's Hebrew studies, but not necessarily in archaeology. And I know lots of archaeologists. Me and David, we interview archaeologists all the time. You're the only one I know that actually has a display in the Israel Museum. That's
I
pretty
was so
cool.
pleased with that. I had only been working as an archaeologist for 5 years, did not have an archaeology degree. And here I had this floor out there that I had helped design. And it kind of blew my mind that that happened. I have another floor that's going to go on display there. And this is a model from Banyas, from tiles that were found by Ehud Netzer back in 1977 and 78, up on the ridge above where the grotto is.
Okay.
And Netzer was trying to figure out, is this building that had an opus reticulum wall in the front of it, was this was this the temple that Josephus says that Herod built there? Josephus doesn't mention anything about a palace. And Raquel Barnatona and I were working with these tiles, and we took a trip up there and we're going, wait a minute, the area that these tiles were in is this here. And there's a wall here, and there's a wall here, and there's another wall going off over there, and another one over there. And there's one going off over here, and here's a wall over here, and here's another wall there, and there's something over there. And over there, there's a wall that has these holes in it, look like it might have been from a bathhouse or something. And we're going, this is not a temple. This is the palace. And when we compared the floor pattern that I came up with based on the tiles that I had, when I compared those floors to the ones at Jericho, it was the same material, is a very similar pattern. The one in Jericho is made out of overlapping 4-pointed stars. The one at Banyas was overlapping 8-pointed stars. We're looking at it, we're going, this is the triclinium of a palace that Herod had up here. And we're not talking about Herod Philip's palace. That one's down on the stream level. This is up on the hill. And we said, hey, this building that Ehud was excavating is a palace. And we published it as that, and people are going, well, you found a palace. Yeah, we found a palace. Now, it has not been totally excavated. Antiquities Authority and the national parks would like to do it, but it's a long-term from now project before they can get to it. We've had problems in the last few years, of course, because this is sitting on the Lebanon border. I mean, it's only about 3 miles from the Lebanon border. So the area is closed a lot. It's been closed to the archaeologists. It was closed during COVID. A few archaeologists were working up there, but it was closed during COVID. It's been closed since October the 7th, 23. Only recently has part of it been reopened again. So it's a place that's kind of tricky. It's been kind of tricky over the past few years to get up there. So they would like eventually to excavate that area now that they've realized how much more is there in terms of structures and floors and walls and everything.
Right.
You
Now
know, that's really cool.
we were sort of talking before the podcast about your travels this year. Maybe you could explain to the audience what's up and coming now and what you're going to be doing in the next little while.
I'll be going to Israel in 10 days. I'll be getting there in 10 days. I'm working with 3 different projects, basically. One is with the Ophel. This is with Hebrew University, Uzi Libner and Orit Peli Barkat. They are there right now excavating in the Ophel area, they've gone through Byzantine levels and they're going down into Second Temple and even First Temple period levels over there. And I have been cataloging Byzantine marble for them, Byzantine polished stones. I've been doing that for several years. And so I'll be cataloging some materials for them. I'll also be going up to Beit Sherim. I'm working with Adi Orlik, who's out of Haifa University. And she has been excavating some areas where they had late Roman church and a late Roman synagogue, both of these in that area. Or no, was it a church? No, it was a synagogue of two different late Roman buildings, plus some of the material from in the necropolis itself. I'm cataloging marble and polished stones for her there. And then the third project is in Jerusalem, where I hope to be cataloging the stones from Herod's Jerusalem palace. These were actually discovered about 50 years ago by Magen Broshi during some of his digs in what's called the David Citadel area. And he had tiles and they got packed away and nobody knew about them until Shimon Gibson discovered them last year and said, hey, here's your tiles. So I'll be cataloging those this year. I'm really looking forward to that because that's another in the Herod's palace set. So those are projects I'll be working on while I'm there.
Great. And then after that, a lot of writing and research, as always.
Yeah, it's a lot of writing, a lot of research that I still do, even though I'm back in the States. I do a lot of writing and a lot of research from here. And then go over there at least once a year in order to catch up on projects or start new projects that somebody hands me over there.
People think it's like the life of Indiana Jones all the time, but no, we only get a couple or 3 weeks to do our work. Actually digging, and then the rest of the time we're pushing a pencil.
That's right. You know, that's an archaeologist's job. They're not digging all the time. You have your dig season, which may be a week, it may be 2 weeks, it may be a month on a site. And then the rest of the year, you're working on publishing reports of where you dug and what you found and the significance of it. And that's one of the main things in archaeology is publishing what you dug. Otherwise, all you've done is dig a hole in the ground, you know, and that doesn't benefit anyone unless you actually publish what you found and the significance of it.
Yeah, now there's a few sites like the new one at Colossae in Turkey, where the Turkish archaeologists from the university there are working year round. They built a dig house there on the site. And so there are a few places like that where they have the advantage of digging year round. And in Israel, there's a few as well, but generally they're only open because they can't get the volunteers. Everybody's working or they have jobs, so it's hard.
Often the archaeologists are connected with universities. They're professors at universities. So they dig during their off season, which is either the summer or the semester break in December, January, February, whenever their semester break is. And you see that in Israel. You know, there's the summer digs and there's the winter digs, which are the winter break digs that the professors are doing.
Or the winter ones were for us because we were on vacation, but also it was too hot to work in the Jordan Valley.
You can't do that in the summer.
No, but you could do Shiloh in the summer, working early mornings. But well, George, do you have any other questions? And
no, I'm just going to back up a little bit because you're talking about Banyas, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I just like to list the audience because we mentioned these and we kind of like assume people know what we're talking about.
Oh, it's the other name is Caesarea Philippi, and
Caesarea Philippi.
a lot of Christians know it as Caesarea Philippi. Right?
Mhm. I think it's one of my favorite places. I'm going to name my 3 favorite places that I visit when I can when I'm in Israel. I don't know if David and you'll relate to this, but maybe you will. Number one, the Herodian. And that's a place that's got this giant swimming pool with an island in the middle of it. To me, that's so
Right.
fantastic. And it's also a location that for almost a century they were speculating where was Herod's tomb.
Where is
And
this
they
tomb? Was it
actually,
on the island in the middle of the lake? Right.
yeah. And the thing is, they found Herod's tomb at the Herodian, where I believe Josephus said that he was buried. And you mentioned Josephus Verpanius. Second is Caesarea. Now, not Caesarea Philippi, the Caesarea Maritima.
Maritima.
You got the giant theater there, and then you got the large ruins of the palace, Herod's palace, that goes out
Mhm.
in the peninsula form. And in our New Testament, it does mention in the epistles about some interactions that the disciples and the Apostle Paul had with the
Paul
dignitaries.
had when he was there. Yep.
And now you mentioned Banyas or Caesarea Philippi. Now that's important because in your Gospels, it talks about how Jesus questions Peter. Who do men say that I am? That's the location that Frankie was talking about. And I think it's fantastic because she's talking about the grotto, and you have to go back some 2,000 years and say, like, what was Jesus and his disciples looking at? And you think of this grotto, and then he says to Peter, and I know there's different variations of Petra, but he says, upon this rock I will build my church. And this is the location that you were talking about when you said Panyas, for the listening
Yes.
audience, to put that in detail so they can have a reference in the scriptural narrative. David, I think the last one, Temple Mount Sifting Project. I know that's not the current name. Is that right? They named it, dubbed it something else.
There are 2 sifting projects right there. The one that's higher up on the hill is the newer Temple Mount Sifting Project, and down below they just call it the it's Emmett National Park. It's part of the city of David. It was always part of the city of David, even when it started. 1 year into the sifting of the material from the Temple Mount, the city of David offered to sponsor that for Gabi Barkai and Zaki Devera, to sponsor it for them, to pay the workers, to pay for the tents, to pay for hauling material and all that stuff. They sponsored the whole thing. So that is the site where all these other materials from around Jerusalem, from around the city of David, we did Tel Azekah there, we did Tel Lachish, we did a number of different sites. People bring materials to them and they will process, sift all the material and send you back your little boxes of really nice goodies. Yes.
Right. Well, so you got this volunteer phenomena there because
Yes.
the Temple Mount Sifting Project has relied on volunteers like yourself
Yes.
or employees, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that have visited that location as public volunteers, in which you have managed the quality control and ensured the accuracy when they are training every day to spot ancient artifacts. Frankie, how do you do that?
Well, first off, when you have volunteers, our staff checks every single tray before it gets dumped into the wheelbarrow. And so you have to have this quality control. And it takes us several weeks just to train our new workers so that they know they know what they're looking for on the tray, and they know what to look for that the volunteers would have missed. But some of the volunteers are absolutely wonderful. Even some of the new workers that we have, they're absolutely wonderful when you start working with them. Other ones haven't a clue, and you're starting from square one. You're saying, okay, take this, spray it, and what do you see on there? And they're going, rocks. Yeah, but among the rocks, there's stuff. You're looking for anything made by man, fashioned by man. Something like pottery that somebody made, or something like a game piece that was shaped from a different kind of rock, or you're looking for coins. So it takes a while to train our workers, the paid workers that are there. But with the volunteers, you check every single tray. Now at Tel Shiloh, because I'm the supervisor, I usually have may have somebody there who's an assistant. Jen Wendell has been doing it some. We don't have the time to check everybody's trays. We have to train our workers and work with them and try to get them up to speed on what is on the trays. And if you're not sure, ask the question. That's why we're here. So the biggest thing we teach them is ask if you don't know. Don't let anything go that you're not sure of. Just ask and we'll do this. Don't worry about asking us 100 questions a day. That's what we're here for. But you've got to, it's like the mother bird has got at a certain point has to push the baby out of the nest and let them fly. This is what we have to do at Tel Shiloh is train them, work with them, or pair two people together so that they're working together and checking the materials. I'll truthfully say there are some people at Tel Shiloh, I never let them work by themselves. They never got to the point where they could really recognize things. It's just how people's brains work. They could find some things and other things just never dawned on them, so you put them with a partner or you check the trays, but usually just put them with a partner.
I remember one of my sayings that was very common was they'd bring me something and, oh, it's just a rock, and then I'd throw it away, and they'd just look at me as so disappointed that they thought they found something really famous.
I know. I would tell them, okay, what you've got to ask yourself is this a something or is it a nothing? If it's a something, what is it? If it's a nothing, okay, it's a rock, throw it over your shoulder and it's gone. You do this all out. Yeah, those are nothings. Okay, but this is a something. Now let me explain to you what this something is, so that they learn it. And as they go along, they do learn.
Yeah. Well, Frankie, it's really been fascinating to catch up again after our time. It's been a few years since we worked at Shiloh together. And how many seasons did you work at Shiloh? I can't remember now.
I was not there this year. This is the first year that I've not worked there. I worked there 7 years. This is the 8th year. I missed this one. I chose not to go because I had so much other work to do and several other reasons. Security and the situation at the time was not very fond of. I was one of those people who got caught over there last year in the middle of the war, and we had to do our reverse exodus march through Egypt in order to get back to the States. And I chose not to go in May and June, but I'm going now to do the other work that I have to do.
Yeah.
But I helped them at Herodian from 2009 through 2016. I was not out there every day. I could only get out there so many days a week because I had a full-time job, so it just makes some time to go out there.
Right.
And then starting 2017, I was with them at Shiloh, just about full-time the whole time. Yeah.
Right. Well, George, did you have any other questions or do you want to take us out or?
Well, if I take us out, later on, I'm going to have another question. But we got to end it somehow here. So yes, let me take us out. Everybody, thanks for being with us. And remember to like, subscribe, and we really appreciate your effort. Me, Dr. Graves, and the rest of the team. Frankie, thanks so much for being with us and giving this insight on the wet sifting and the techniques in which you used to find and piece together the tile fragments that are now on display at the Israel Museum. I think that's so fantastic. And congratulations for that. On your trip going back to Israel, please be safe and good luck in your research. And I hope you find something unexpected and really cool.
I do too. So thank you very much for having me back again.
Thank you for listening to the Stones That Speak Biblical Archaeology podcast. All our archaeology books can be found at our ECM website and available on Amazon. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more informative episodes. Visit us at Stones That Speak, blogspot.com, and on YouTube for additional content. Thanks for watching.